Hey boys and girls, we are back with another lesson. This is Miss Carter, and we're going to look at comparing and contrasting again. We talked about it before, and we learned what it meant, and now we're going to look at it as we talk about elements of a story and how we can compare and contrast them. We also looked at something called a Venn diagram yesterday, and it's just two overlapping circles that help us organize our thoughts when we compare and contrast. We remember that this side tells how something is different, and this side also shows that another item is different. And where the circles overlap, that tells how the items are the same. We talked about different things we could compare and contrast, and today we're going to compare and contrast elements of a story. Well, let's look at some story elements. What are story elements? We've talked about it before. We might have the characters. So we could tell how the characters in two different stories are the same and how they're different. And that would be comparing and contrasting characters. We could also compare and contrast the setting in two different stories or more. We could also compare and contrast different events that happen in the story. Maybe there's some things that are the same, and then there's some events that happen that are different. Let's look at this story. It's called The Fox and the Stork. This is a fable. I'm going to read it, and I want you to think about the characters and the setting. And it might sound a little familiar to you because we read another story called The Fox and the Raven. So I want you to be thinking about how this story is the same as The Fox and the Raven and how it's different. A fox invited a stork over for dinner. The fox served a very thin soup in a very shallow bowl. It was easy enough for the fox to lap the soup out of the bowl, but the stork pecked with her long, narrow beak and couldn't even get one drop of soup. "I'm dreadfully sorry, Stork," said the fox. "It seems that my soup is not to your taste. Look at this shallow bowl down here. It's short, and look at this long beak that the stork has. She couldn't get any of the soup." "That's quite all right, Fox," said the stork politely. "Why don't you come over to my house for dinner next Tuesday?" Next Tuesday came around, and the fox visited the stork for dinner. The stork served soup also, but in a jar with a very long, skinny neck. Look at this jar. It was easy enough for the stork to stick her thin beak into the jar and slurp up the soup, but the fox could only lick the rim of the jar. He couldn't even get a drop of soup. "Oh, I'm so dreadfully sorry, Fox," said the stork. "Perhaps the soup is not to your taste." The fox just sat there, hungrily licking his chops. Now, let's talk about contrasting these stories and comparing these stories. We're going to do a compare and contrast about story elements. On this side, we're going to be putting things that go with the fox and the raven. Remember, if we contrast it and it's different, it will go over here if it's only true about the fox and the raven. And on this side, we'll be putting things about the fox and the stork story. So if it's different from the fox and the raven, we'll put it over here. In the middle is where we compare them and we tell how they're the same. That's why the circles overlap. So I want you to get out your ELA notebook because you're going to be writing some things down as you pause the video and go through. All right, let's talk about one of the characters that's the same in both stories. Pause the video and write down a character that's the same in The Fox and the Raven and The Fox and the Stork. I think this one is pretty obvious. Pause now. Okay, I bet you figured this one out. It's a fox. There's a fox in both stories. Now the next one might be a little trickier. There's similar characters in both stories. Obviously, it's not exactly the same type, but it's very similar. I want you to pause the video and see if you can write down the type of character that is the same in both stories. Pause now. Did you figure it out? There's a bird character in both stories. Even though this one's a raven and this one is a big stork, they're still birds. So we can say there's a fox character and there's a bird character in both stories. All right, now there's a trickster in both stories. That's the character that is kind of tricking someone else. So I want you to pause the video and write down who is the trickster in both stories. Pause now. Okay, did you get it? It's the fox. The fox is the trickster in both stories. In The Fox and the Raven, he tricks the raven so that he can get the cheese. And in The Fox and the Stork, he tricks the stork. He invites him over, really kind of realizing that he's not going to be able to have any of the food. All right, let's try and do a contrast. Who gets the food at the end of The Fox and the Raven? It's not the same character that gets the food at the end of The Fox and the Stork. So I want you to pause the video and you can write down who gets the food at the end of The Fox and the Raven and who gets the food at the end of The Fox and the Stork. Pause now. Okay, did you figure it out? The fox gets the cheese at the end of The Fox and the Raven. And who gets the food at the end of The Fox and the Stork? Well, it's the bird character, or the stork, obviously. So the stork gets the food at the end of this story. He ended up getting the soup because he decided to play a trick on the fox. All right, let's try another one. The setting. I want you to think about the setting in both stories. Now, remember, in fables, the setting isn't really much to do with the story, but I think you have an idea of where the story for The Fox and the Raven took place, and maybe where the story for The Fox and the Stork took place. So I want you to pause the video and write the setting down for each story. It's not the same. Pause now. Okay, what did you come up with? The setting in The Fox and the Raven is outside because there was a tree that the bird flew into. Now, the setting in The Fox and the Stork seemed to me like it was at the animals' homes because it said they invited them over for dinner. Now, that could have been outside. They weren't real specific, but they did have dishes and things like that. So it seems like maybe these animals live in a house. All right, let's try one more. Learns a lesson. Which character learns a lesson at the end of this story? Which character maybe trusted someone and got taught a lesson? And then which character maybe learned that their behavior cost them something in the end? So I want you to write down the character that learned a lesson in both stories. It's not the same character, or we would put it in the middle. Pause the video and write that down. Okay, who learned a lesson at the end of The Fox and the Raven? Well, it was the bird character, so it was the raven. The raven learned not to trust everyone that compliments him. His pride ended up making him lose that cheese. Well, in The Fox and the Stork, who learns a lesson? It was the fox. He learned that if you trick other people, they might trick you. So he actually learned a lesson in this one, and the bird ended up tricking him back. All right, and there's one more that doesn't have a pair over, it doesn't have a match on The Fox and the Raven. It's only true about The Fox and the Stork. Who gets tricked in The Fox and the Stork that doesn't get tricked in The Fox and the Raven? So this one is only true in this story. One of the characters gets tricked over here, but doesn't get tricked over here. I want you to pause the video and write that down. Pause now. Did you figure it out? Well, the fox gets tricked by the stork at the end of the story. Over here, the fox tricks the raven and gets the cheese, and that's the end of it. So he doesn't get taught a lesson in this story. All right, you guys did a great job, and we have learned how to compare and contrast story elements. Awesome!